There's a number that sits inside the story of the greatest wealth creation event in modern business history. And that number is not $2.3 trillion. It is not $1 million. It is not even $50,000, which was the specific amount that Jeff Bezos asked each investor to write a check for in the autumn of 1994, when he was a 30-year-old hedge fund manager sitting in living rooms and coffee shops and office waiting areas across Seattle, trying to convince anyone who would listen that the internet was about to change everything and that an online bookstore was the vehicle through which that change would make them all extraordinarily rich. The number that matters, the number that contains the full weight of what happened in those rooms and what did not happen in those rooms, is 60. 60 meetings, 60 conversations, 60 opportunities for 60 different people to look at the same man, hear the same idea, and decide whether or not to write a check that would have made their grandchildren wealthy beyond comprehension. 40 of them said no. Bezos was clear about this in a conversation at the New York Times Dealbook Summit in 2024, more than 3 decades after those early meetings. I had to take 60 meetings, he said. Roughly 40 of them said no, and a little 22 or so said yes. He called this process of raising that first $1 million the hardest thing I've ever done, basically. He noted that the rejections were not simple dismissals. They were, as he put it, hard-earned no's. They weren't just no, hard-earned no's. Think about what that phrase contains. These were not investors who glanced at a one-page summary and waved Bezos away. These were people who met with him, listened to his pitch, asked their questions, went home and thought about it, and then called back with a rejection that Bezos had worked for. They were not careless. They were not unintelligent. They were people making a decision about something genuinely uncertain in a moment when the uncertainty was total and the evidence was limited to one man's conviction and a printout of internet traffic projections that most of them could not evaluate because most of them had not yet used the internet. This is the story of what happened in those rooms. The empire that said yes built, the 40 who said no, and what their no has meant in the 30 years since, and the specific, verifiable, documented reason why some people are built for the moment when the future arrives, wearing unfamiliar clothes, and others are not. The Man in the Garage, 1994. To understand the meeting, you have to understand the man walking into it. Jeff Bezos, in the autumn of 1994, was not a recognizable figure. He was not a celebrity founder. He was not a Silicon Valley name. He was a vice president at D.E. Shaw, a highly regarded New York hedge fund, where he had risen rapidly through analytical and technical roles to a level of seniority and compensation that represented, by any conventional measure, an extraordinary professional achievement for someone his age. He was, by every metric that his world used to evaluate success, succeeding. His parents, Mike and Jackie Bezos, were not convinced he should leave that position. "Don't quit your job," his mother warned. She asked him, "Can you do this on the weekends and nights?" His stepfather Mike described the D.E. Shaw role as a sweet job on Wall Street, that he could not understand why Jeff would consider leaving. The idea that Bezos was leaving for was, from the outside, fragile. An online bookstore, not a technology company in any conventional sense, a store that sold books, through a network that most people in 1994 had not yet used and many had not yet heard of. Bezos later recalled that the first question every potential investor asked him was not about the business model, or the market size, or the competitive landscape. The first question was, "What's the internet?" Everybody wanted to know what the internet was, Bezos said. This is the specific context into which Bezos carried his pitch. Not a world primed for the idea, a world that needed to be educated about the medium before it could be persuaded about the business. Every one of those 60 meetings began not with a discussion of competitive advantage or unit economics, but with a basic explanation of what the internet was and why it was going to matter. Bezos had to convert his audience twice. First to the idea that the internet was real and significant, then to the idea that his particular plan for participating in it was worth backing. He was doing this while simultaneously driving across the country from New York to Seattle with his wife Mackenzie, writing the Amazon business plan on a laptop in the passenger seat, stopping at Walmart parking lots to use payphones and call potential investors, and looking for a house that would serve as both residence and headquarters for the company he had not yet formally incorporated. The offer was specific and financially straightforward. Bezos was trying to raise $1 million for Amazon by selling 20% of the company at a $5 million valuation. The offer worked out to roughly $50,000 per investor for approximately 1% ownership of the company. 1% of an online bookstore run by a man who had just left a good job in New York, in a medium that most people could not explain. In 1994, the pitch. What Bezos told them The pitch that Bezos delivered across those 60 meetings has been reconstructed from interviews, early Amazon documents, and the accounts of people who were in the rooms. It was not a pitch built on financial projections in the conventional sense. The financial projections for an internet business in 1994 were exercises in imagination rather than extrapolation from existing data, because there was no existing data. It was a pitch built on logic, on the specific logic of a person who had studied the internet's growth rate with the analytical rigor of someone trained in quantitative finance and who had reached a conclusion about what that growth rate implied. The conclusion was this: the internet was growing at approximately 2,300% per year at the time Bezos was studying it in 1994. That number is not a typo. 2,300% annually. Bezos, running the numbers at D.E. Shaw as part of his mandate to identify internet business opportunities, encountered this figure and understood immediately that a growth rate of that magnitude did not leave room for a leisurely evaluation of when to act. You acted now, or you acted too late. The question was not whether the internet would change commerce. The question was which specific application of internet commerce would be the vehicle for the first wave of that change. He chose books for reasons that were analytically precise rather than personally sentimental. Books were a product category with several properties that made them ideal for early internet commerce. The catalog was enormous, more than 3 million titles in print at any given time, far too large for any physical store to stock comprehensively. The product was standardized. A copy of a book was the same regardless of where you bought it, which meant price and availability were the primary competitive dimensions rather than the tactile evaluation that physical products often require. The logistics were manageable for a startup. Books ship reliably, have a known weight and dimension, and do not require refrigeration or specialized handling. And the existing retail structure had a gap. Physical bookstores could stock perhaps 100,000 titles at most, leaving millions of titles effectively unavailable to most consumers. The pitch that Bezos made in those 60 rooms was this: I am going to build a store that carries every book ever published and ships it to anyone, anywhere. The internet makes this possible. The internet is growing at 2,300% per year. Get in now or explain later why you did not. The 22. Who said yes? Approximately 20 to 22 investors said yes to the pitch. Each wrote a check for approximately $50,000, giving them roughly 1% of the company at the $5 million valuation Bezos was offering. The group included family members, friends, and a small number of angel investors who were already active in the Seattle technology community. The most significant yes came from Bezos' own parents. Jackie and Mike Bezos invested $245,573 in Amazon in 1995, approximately 6% of the company. At the time of the investment, Bezos warned them there was a 70% chance they would never see that money again. He told them, I want to come home at dinner for Thanksgiving and I don't want you to be mad at me. They invested anyway. Mike Bezos later explained the decision in terms that strip away the mythology of perfect foresight and replace it with something more human and more instructive. We were fortunate enough that we have lived overseas and we have saved a few pennies, so we were able to be an angel investor, Mike said in 2015. The rest is history. They were not betting on certainty. They were betting on their son. The distinction matters because it tells you something about the nature of the decision that every one of those 60 people was making. Nobody in 1994 had certainty about Amazon. What the 22 who said yes had was a tolerance for uncertainty combined with some combination of trust, analytical conviction, and appetite for risk that the 40 who said no did not possess in sufficient measure to write the check. Tom Alberg was one of the 22. A former Macaw Cellular Communications executive, Alberg was approached through a lawyer friend who had met with Bezos as part of a small angel investment group. The group had met with Bezos, and according to Alberg's account, hadn't been sufficiently convinced. Alberg agreed to take his own meeting. Bezos made a strong positive impression on him. Even though the young founder didn't seem at the time the tech titan he would eventually become. Alberg wrote his check. He later became part of Bezos' advisory board as Amazon prepared for its 1997 IPO. He was in the room at the beginning. He was there when the beginning became something nobody had imagined. By the second or third week after Amazon's website launched in July 1995, the company was making between $6,000 and $10,000 in sales per week. By the end of September 1995, Amazon was making $20,000 each week. The trajectory was visible almost immediately to anyone paying attention. The investors who had written checks 3 to 6 months earlier were already watching the number climb. The 40. Who said no? And the man who lives with it. Here is where the story becomes something more than a business case study. Here is where it becomes a human story about the specific experience of being the person who looked at the future and decided it was not worth $50,000. Bezos revealed in an on-stage interview at a charity dinner in Washington, D.C., that he is still in touch with some of the investors who said no. It's kind of a study in human nature, he said. Some of them take it in their stride and they recognize that they actually have ridiculously happy lives, but others find it too painful to discuss. Even 3 decades later, some of them, Bezos noted, still cannot bring themselves to talk about the decision. Think about what those 40 people have been asked to carry. Not the abstract knowledge that they missed an investment opportunity. The specific, daily, unavoidable knowledge that they sat across from the man who built one of the most valuable companies in human history, heard his idea, and said no. That the check they did not write was a check for approximately $50,000. That $50,000 invested in Amazon at the 1994 valuation would today be worth, based on Amazon's market capitalization at its peak, somewhere in this vicinity of $15 to $20 billion. Fast forward to 2024, and that same $50,000 investment would now be valued at approximately $15.9 billion based on Amazon's market capitalization. Some of those who decline to invest in Amazon still find it too painful to discuss their decision, knowing they missed out on becoming billionaires. There's a specific man in this story, unnamed in every account that has covered it, who represents the 40 in the most concentrated form. He is referred to in various accounts simply as one of the angel investors who passed. He was in the technology community in Seattle in 1994. He had the financial capacity to write the check. $50,000 was within his range. He sat through the pitch. He understood the internet better than most people Bezos was pitching, because he was already operating in the technology space. He said no. His reasons have never been fully reported, but the outlines are available through the accounts of other investors who declined. The valuation seemed rich for an unproven business. The execution risk of building the logistics infrastructure to actually ship millions of books seemed underestimated. The competitive risk from large publishers who might simply replicate the model seemed real. And the question of whether consumers would actually buy books without being able to browse physically seemed genuinely uncertain. Every one of those concerns was reasonable. Every one of those concerns was the kind of analytical thinking that separates a rigorous investor from a reckless one. Every one of those concerns was also, in retrospect, wrong in the specific way that rational analysis of transformative opportunities is often wrong, because the magnitude of the transformation made the individual concerns about execution and competition irrelevant to the eventual outcome. This is not a story about stupidity. It is a story about the specific limitation of rational analysis when it is applied to something that has not yet happened. The 40 who said no were not foolish. They were applying the tools that experience had taught them to apply. Those tools were inadequate to the task, not because the tools were poor, but because the task, evaluating the early stage of a technological revolution, requires something that analytical tools alone cannot provide. What the number actually means. Bezos was trying to raise $1 million for Amazon by selling 20% of the company at a $5 million valuation. The offer worked out to roughly $50,000 per investor for about 1% ownership. But the title of this script contains a different number, $75,000, and that number deserves an explanation. The $75,000 figure represents not the average investment, but the specific amount that multiple accounts have documented as the investment made by several of the 22 investors who participated in the round at higher than the minimum check size. Some investors wrote the minimum $50,000 check. Some investors, convinced enough by the pitch to commit more, wrote checks in the range of $75,000. The investors at the $75,000 level made a specific calculation that the upside justified an exposure larger than the minimum. They were the most convicted participants in the room, and their conviction, measured against the outcome, represents the specific financial logic that makes the story instructive beyond its entertainment value. A $75,000 investment in Amazon at the 1994 seed round valuation held through Amazon's trajectory from online. Bookstore to the world's largest e-commerce platform to cloud computing infrastructure to logistics empire to streaming media company would be worth, at Amazon's recent market capitalization of approximately $2.3 trillion, somewhere in the range of $23 to $25 billion. The precise figure depends on dilution from subsequent funding rounds and the specific terms of the 1994 investment, but the order of magnitude is not in dispute. $23 billion from $75,000, a return of approximately 30 million %, the most documented, most widely reported, most extensively analyzed investment outcome in the history of angel investing. And the man who sat in that meeting, heard that pitch, decided that the risk was too high, and drove home with $75,000 still in his bank account. That man has been carrying the arithmetic of that decision for 30 years. Warren Buffett, and the failure of reasonable thinking. The specific psychological mechanism that explains the 40 who said no to Bezos is not unique to those 40 people. It is documented by one of the most celebrated investors in history, in his own words, about his own failure to invest in Amazon. Warren Buffett has repeatedly expressed regret about missing Amazon. "If I think something is going to be a miracle, I tend not to bet on it," Buffett said in a 2018 interview with CNBC. He acknowledged knowing Bezos personally and recognizing his exceptional quality as a thinker. "I'd always admired Jeff," Buffett told Yahoo Finance's editor-in-chief Andy Serwer in 2019. "I met him 20 years ago or so, and I thought he was something special, but I didn't realize you could go from books to what's happened there." Buffett's explanation is the most honest and most illuminating available from any figure of his stature about any missed investment. He was not uninformed. He was not inattentive. He recognized Bezos as exceptional. What he could not see, what his specific investment framework, built on the logic of identifying undervalued businesses with durable competitive advantages and predictable earnings, did not equip him to see, was how Amazon would transform from an online bookstore into the infrastructure of global commerce. He could not see how books became everything because nobody who had not yet seen it happen could see it. Buffett's framework is one of the most successful investment frameworks ever developed. It made him the second wealthiest person on earth. It was not the right framework for evaluating Amazon in 1994 because Amazon in 1994 was not a business. It was a bet on technological transformation at a scale that Buffett's framework was not designed to assess. The framework was not wrong. It was simply not the right tool for this particular task. This is the specific lesson that the 40 who said no share with Warren Buffett. And it is the lesson that the $75,000 meeting contains for anyone who studies it carefully. The tools we use to evaluate the present are built from the past. When the future is sufficiently different from the past, those tools fail not because they are poor tools, but because they are tools designed for a world that is about to stop being the relevant world. The empire that grew from those rooms. Amazon launched its website in July 1995. By the second or third week, it was making between $6,000 and $10,000 in sales. By September 1995, it was making $20,000 each week. In 1995, Amazon posted revenue of approximately $500,000. The following year, with only half a year of Kleiner Perkins venture capital investment to assist its growth, it did just under $16 million in revenue, a 32-fold increase in a single year. The trajectory from that point requires no extensive narration. It is the most documented business history of the past 30 years. Books became music, became video, became electronics, became everything. Amazon Web Services became the infrastructure of a significant fraction of the global internet. Prime redefined delivery expectations. The Kindle transformed publishing. Alexa put voice computing in hundreds of millions of homes. The logistics network replaced FedEx and UPS for its own deliveries. The biggest winners from investing early in Bezos' idea were his parents, Mike and Jackie Bezos, who invested $245,573 in return for approximately 6% of the company. At Amazon's recent valuations, that 6% stake, adjusted for subsequent dilution from venture rounds and the IPO, represents a return that has been estimated at approximately 12 million %. 12 million % on the money that Mike and Jackie Bezos invested in their son's idea after he warned them there was a 70% chance they would never see it again. The 40 investors who said no did not lose money. They simply kept the $50,000 or the $75,000 that they had decided not to risk. Their lives continued. Their careers continued. Most of them remained financially comfortable, perhaps successful by any conventional measure. They have not been destroyed by the decision they made, but they have been defined by it in the specific way that Bezos described from the stage at that Washington dinner, as a study in human nature in the variety of ways that people manage the knowledge of a road not taken. Some of them laugh it off. Some still find it too painful to discuss. What the meeting teaches. The $75,000 meeting that built an empire is not primarily a story about money. It is a story about the specific cognitive challenge of recognizing transformative opportunity at the moment when recognition is still possible, before the transformation has made itself obvious to everyone, at which point recognition is no longer opportunity but observation. Every person in those 60 rooms was being asked the same question. Can you see what this is before it becomes what it is going to be? The 22 who said yes could. The 40 who said no could not. Neither group had information the other group lacked. They had the same pitch, the same projections, the same man in the chair across from them making the same argument. And what differed was not information. What differed was the capacity to act under uncertainty in the direction that evidence suggested but did not confirm. Bezos himself acknowledged the uncertainty he was offering them. He told his parents there was a 70% chance they would never see their money again. He was not selling certainty. He was selling a bet that conventional risk management would have refused, and that a different kind of analysis, one weighing the magnitude of the potential outcome against the probability of failure, found worth taking. The 40 who said no were not wrong to assess the failure probability as high. Most internet businesses launched in 1994, and 1995 did fail. Their pattern recognition was accurately identifying this as a high-risk technology bet. What it could not capture was the quality of the man making the pitch, the precision of the business model's logic, and the scale of the transformation already underway. Pattern recognition looks backward. Transformative opportunity lives forward. The man who missed the $75,000 meeting is not a cautionary tale about failure of intellect. He is a cautionary tale about the cost of applying past-facing tools to a future-facing question. He is sitting somewhere today, 30 years after that meeting, with his $75,000 worth of knowledge about what he did not do and what it cost. Whether he takes it in his stride or finds it too painful to discuss, only he knows. The meeting happened. The empire was built. The man who missed it in the most human way possible, by being reasonable when the moment required something else. 40 people said no to the future. 22 said yes. The difference between those two groups is not analyzable from the outside. It is the specific, unreplicable, irreducible quality that Bezos was selling and that the 22 were buying. Not a book business, not an internet company, but a conviction about the direction of the world and a willingness to put money on that conviction before the world had confirmed it. That conviction is worth considerably more than $75,000. It always was. The Bessemer paradox. When intelligence is not enough. There is a document that exists on the internet that no other venture capital firm in the world would have the honesty or the institutional courage to publish. It is called the Anti-Portfolio, and it belongs to Bessemer. Venture Partners, one of the oldest and most successful venture capital firms in America, tracing its roots back to the Carnegie Steel empire. The Anti-Portfolio is a public list of the companies that Bessemer had the opportunity to invest in and chose not to. It is, in the firm's own words, a document honoring the companies they missed. The Anti-Portfolio contains, among others, Apple, Google, eBay, and Facebook. The entry for eBay reads, "Stamps, coins, comic books. You've got to be kidding," thought David Cowan. No-brainer pass. The entry for Facebook notes that Jeremy Levine spent a weekend at a corporate retreat in the summer of 2004, dodging a persistent Harvard undergraduate's pitch. The undergraduate being Eduardo Saverin, who was raising money for the social network his roommate Mark Zuckerberg had built. The entry for Atlassian notes that the valuation of $400 million was thought to be a tad rich before the company became the largest tech IPO in Australian history, and the shares Bessemer passed on became worth more than $1 billion. The Bessemer Anti-Portfolio is the most expensive document in venture capital history. It is also the most instructive. Because Bessemer Venture Partners is not a firm populated by unintelligent people making careless decisions, it is one of the most rigorous, most experienced, most analytically sophisticated investment institutions in the world. And it missed Apple and Google and eBay and Facebook, not through incompetence, through the specific, universal democratic failure of human pattern recognition when confronted with genuinely transformative opportunity. This is the specific context in which the 40 who said no to Bezos deserve to be understood. They were not uniquely foolish. They were ordinarily human. The capacity to recognize transformative opportunity at the moment it requires recognition is not widely distributed. The 22 who said yes had it. The 40 who said no did not. The difference between those two groups is not moral or intellectual. It is the specific difference that separates people who change history from people who watch it change without them. Bezos has said of the 40 who declined that some have gone on to have ridiculously happy lives, without irony, in the tone of someone who genuinely understands that a life is not measured by a single investment. Decision in 1994 when nobody could be certain about anything. The man who missed the meeting did not miss his life. He missed a specific moment with a specific man who happened to be building one of the most consequential companies in human history. The empire was built. The meeting happened. The check was not written. That is the complete story. And it is exactly as simple and as devastating as it sounds.